made the same promises. Every time. Look it up. They made the same promises that their trickle-down tax policy would drive economic growth, cut our deficit, pay for themselves. Every time, including the recent Trump tax cut in 2017, these promises have been false. They've been false. That was 8 years ago. That wasn't a century ago. We know what the math is. Everybody in this room knows the deficit is far worse today than it was when Donald Trump passed those tax cuts. President Trump has had a very rare thing happen, which is he got to take 4 years off and come back and be president. The effect of the tax cuts he passed the last time that he said we're going to pay for themselves clearly have not. There's nobody in this chamber who can deny that. I always find it amazing when I hear these promises, why people make them if they know they're so false, over and over and over again. And I think the reason is, Madam President, that it is a way that politicians in Washington can avoid the objections that you could never get away with at home. Imagine for a minute if there were a mayor in America, any mayor, in any town, in Santa Fe, New Mexico, or in Lyman, Colorado, or in Los Angeles, California. It doesn't matter, Republican town or a Democratic town. Imagine if a mayor came to you, Madam President, and said, this town is going to borrow more money than we have ever borrowed before. That would worry you, that would worry me. And I think our first question would be to that mayor, okay, that worries me. What are you going to spend the money on that you're borrowing? Are you going to spend it on schools? No. Are you going to spend it on parks? No. Are you going to spend it on the water infrastructure that so many communities in New Mexico require? Are you going to spend it on the mental health crisis that our teenagers are facing because of our failure to address it? Are you going to spend it on infrastructure? And the answer to all those questions would be no. What are you going to spend the money on, Mr. Mayor? Well, the answer is I am going to give tax cuts to the 2 richest neighborhoods in town and hope that those trickle down to everybody else. That is the Republican tax policy. There's a reason why no mayor in America has ever done that. There is no mayor in America who has ever pursued trickle-down economics, because you would get run out on a rail. You would get run out on a rail if you went and said, we are going to borrow the most money that has ever been borrowed from our children to finance tax cuts for the richest neighborhoods in town. It makes no sense. It is preposterous. And yet that has been the argument since Ronald Reagan first said these tax cuts will be paid for. The economy will grow. There won't be a deficit. There's a reason we're paying more than $1 trillion in interest today, and that's because our deficits are enormous. Fortunately, and this is really important for the American people to understand, we still live in the strongest country in the world. We are in the world's richest economy. We have the most lethal military. Apart from our president, we have a national commitment to an independent judiciary, the rule of law, and low levels of corruption in our economy and in our society. We have unparalleled capital markets, cutting-edge innovation, and world-leading universities. We have all those things going for us, partly because the folks that came before us invested in those things and built those things and tended those things. But what we struggle with in our time is a sense among most Americans that they can't get ahead, that the American dream is farther and farther out of reach for themselves and for their family. And in my view, that is the biggest challenge our country faces. And in the face of this bill's ill-considered tax cuts to our health care, and in the face of this bill's ill-considered tax cut and cuts to our health care system, which is going to throw millions of people off their health care and make health care more expensive for everybody else. By the way, what's the logic of that? The logic of that is that when you throw people off their health care, they end up going to the emergency room to take care of themselves and take care of their families, just as anybody would. That's the most expensive care that anybody could have. That expense is then put into our insurance, in our insurance policies, and all of us are going to pay more. You can't wish away people just because you throw them off health insurance. When other countries in the world, other wealthy, rich countries in the world have a system of insurance that basically guarantees health care and mental health care to their citizens, it's worth asking why we would throw our people off the not-so-great health insurance that they have. That's a good question. But it's particularly crazy when it just drives up the cost for everybody else. We need to deeply think about the challenges that our country is facing today. It's more unequal. The top 1% owns 30% of our nation's wealth, Madam President, and the bottom 50% owns 2.5%. The top 1% of Americans own 50% of the value of the stock market. The top 1% of Americans own 50% of the value of the stock market, while the bottom 50% owns just 1% of its value. Something that's really affecting my state is the nation's median home price is now 5 times higher than median family income. And as a result, the average first-time homebuyer is now 38 years old. Madam President, 38 years old versus 29 just a generation ago. Reading scores in our nation have hit a 20-year low. And perhaps most damning and perhaps most upsetting is that our lifespan has declined since the 1980s. We are now, on average, likely to die 6 years shorter than other people that live in wealthy countries around the world. If you're African American, your chance of dying is on average 12 years sooner than people living in the industrialized world. If we don't shift course soon, Madam President, we will be the first generation of Americans whose kids and grandkids will be worse off than we are. That has never happened before. We are on track for that to happen to our children. Many young people today can't afford to live on their own, and they may never be able to afford a house. They can't afford health care or child care. They can't count on a quality education for their children in too many parts of America. Some are really worried about whether they're going to be able to afford a child at all. If you haven't heard a family say that to you in your town halls, or in your meetings, you haven't been paying attention. But instead of addressing any of these challenges, we are debating a bill tonight that will make the wealthiest Americans even wealthier and the poorest Americans even poorer, 500,000 of whom live in Colorado, while adding millions more to the debt which working Americans are going to have to pay back. That's what this Republican trickle-down economics comes down to. No matter how you dress it up, that's what it comes down to. Our generation has made some very bad choices when it comes to our children's future. This bill only makes matters worse for them. And all this debt will constrain the choices that they are going to be able to make for themselves. And that's a shame, Madam President. Because unlike us, perhaps they will aspire to following in the footsteps of the greatest generation to build a country where lifespans are growing, not falling, where economic mobility is rising, where poverty and economic anxiety are falling, where energy exports are increasing and emissions are decreasing, where quality health care and child care, education, and affordable housing are abundant, not scarce. It seems obvious to me, Madam President, that our child's ambition should be ours as well. Unfortunately, tomorrow, the Republican majority may pass a bill that takes us further in the wrong direction. In its wake and in its wreckage, Americans who do feel an obligation to the next generation are going to have to fight even harder to fulfill our duty. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The Senator from California.
Madam President, today we meet at the center of a great debate, at a crossroads that will determine the direction of the country for another generation. And this debate, this choice, goes to the heart of a central question that has been plaguing families in America over the last 3 decades, but that is now just coming to the forefront. And that question is this: if you are working hard in America, can you still earn a good living for yourself and your family? If you are working hard in America, can you still buy a home or pay your rent, buy your food and medicine, get the health care you need, afford fuel for your car, get a decent education, or go on a family vacation? And if the answer is no, and for all too many millions of people the answer is no, what do we do about it? When I was a kid, my father was in the clothing business. He was a traveling salesman and he made $18,000 a year. On the strength of that single income, my parents bought our first home for $18,000. He made $18,000 a year and he bought a home. My parents bought a home for $18,000. It was the American dream and it came true for our family. Today I'm a U.S. Senator. That too is part of the American dream, that anything is possible in this country. But could anyone buy a home for the cost of the annual income even of a U.S. Senator? Not a chance in the world. An average home in California costs 3 or 4 times that much. My kids are paying thousands and thousands of dollars a month in rent. Could they find a home for the cost of their annual income? There is even less of a chance of that. And what about your grandkids? At the rate we are going, at the rate housing prices are rising, what chance will they have to afford a home at any income? And of course, it's not just a home. Healthcare costs are rising even faster. Millions of families are only one healthcare crisis away from failing. And it's not their fault. It's not their fault. They are working hard, harder than ever, and they can't keep pace with rising premiums, out-of-pocket costs, hospital stays, drug costs, and charges at the emergency room. Energy prices are going up. It costs more to heat your home in the winter and a lot more to cool your home in the summer. Utility bills have been rising by double digits, while incomes have remained comparatively flat. It's too much. It's too much. Now, why is this coming to a head now? Why, when we're not in a Great Depression, not even a Great Recession, although with Trump's destructive tariff wars, we may get there soon enough, why now? Why now is this coming to a head? And the answer is that people feel more squeezed than ever, more pressure than ever, more like a failure than ever because they're doing their best, working their hardest, and they are still hanging by a thread. And you know something? It's not their fault. It's not their fault. They are doing everything they can to provide for their families, and it's just not enough. It's not their fault, but it is someone's fault. It is someone's responsibility. There is someone who should be held accountable for the fact that this generation is the first to renege on a compact between generations that we would leave the country better off to the next generation than the one that came before. And you know who that someone is? It is us. It is us. The world has changed, the nature of work has changed, and we have not changed with it. We have not kept pace, and in too many ways, through our policy failures, we have moved the country in the wrong direction. And the question before us today is whether we continue to barrel down that track towards higher home prices, bigger health care costs, more hunger and greater hardship, or whether we change direction. Much too late, yes, requiring an even more profound course correction, certainly, but finally steer this country to a better quality of life for all of our citizens. Is this bill that change in direction? Does it lead our country on a new path towards affordability and prosperity? And the answer, the simple, terrible, but clear as day answer is no. It most emphatically does not. No, it does nothing to bring down costs. No, it does nothing to make it easier for your kids or mine to buy a house, pay their rent, buy groceries, afford their medicine, or fill up the car for a family vacation. Instead, it throws more coal in the engine, barreling down a track to nowhere. Donald Trump promised he wouldn't cut Medicaid, but this bill cuts hundreds of billions of dollars from Medicaid. It is shredding the president's commitment made again and again. In January, the president said Republicans will love and cherish Medicaid. In February, he said, we're not going to touch it. Even a few weeks ago, the president said, we're not changing Medicaid, we're leaving it. But we see in the black and white in this text they released in the dark of night that simply isn't true. This bill will result in millions losing their health care from cuts to Medicaid. We know that. The Republicans know that. Tom Tillis has made this point over and over again tonight, as have other Republicans in this body. This bill will close down hospitals in the poorest counties and states. It will raise health care costs for families everywhere and by the thousands of dollars. It takes food away from the hungry. It kills clean energy so that we have to rely on oil and gas for everything, enriching that industry and impoverishing the rest of us with higher prices at the pump. It raises taxes on working families and the middle class while lowering taxes on the very wealthy and corporations. If you are in the top 0.1% of income earners making more than $5 million a year, you will get a $346,000 tax cut. How is that fair? How is that right? And it borrows the money from our kids to pay for that $346,000 $146,000 tax cut to pay for the habits of really rich people. Where is the fairness, the morality in that? When is enough enough? My father was part of the greatest generation. We, would appear, are part of the most selfish. And I'm fed up with it. I'm fed up with it. What happened to any sense of responsibility in this generation? What happened to love of country? Can we love our country and impoverish it? Can we love our children and grandchildren if we take from them only to give to ourselves? In this bill, we borrowed trillions from our kids. And for what? So the rich can have a bigger boat? So corporate CEOs can have more money? So a company can buy back more of its stock? So we can be richer than our neighbor while his neighbor has no home at all? The test of our progress, Franklin Roosevelt said in 1937, is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It is whether we provide enough for those who have too little. Last week, a landscaper in Los Angeles was tackled to the ground because he was undocumented. He's the father of 3 Marines. 3 Marines. When one of those Marines was finally able to speak to his father after his detention, he had one ask of his son: please go back to the work site and finish the job. That was his ask. That is the work ethic that has made this country great, not the ethic that brought him to the ground. Raising 3 Marines, that is the patriotism that has made this country great, not the rancor that beat him while he lay there. But if this bill is not the answer, and it most certainly is not, if this bill only makes matters worse, far worse, then what is the answer? What direction shall we go? How can we begin to make the country work for people once again? Well, we can give instead of take. We can build instead of tear down. We can recapture once again the sense of possibility in this country. If Eisenhower was part of the generation that won the war and built the roads and highways, let us be the generation that wins the peace by creating the next giant boom in housing in America, making the investment necessary, tapping into the great potential of the government and industry working together, breaking down each obstacle in the way, millions and millions of new homes that my children can afford and your children. Let us build new hospitals instead of closing them down, and in so doing, bring the cost of health care down with them. Let us train new doctors and nurses so it is not so expensive to visit them, and new home health care workers to take care of us even as we take care of them. Let us grow more food and feed more people at home and abroad and bring down the cost of our groceries. Let us thank our farm workers instead of chasing them through the fields to separate them from those they love. None of this is beyond our capacity. It may mean that we can't afford yet another tax break for the wealthy, or a giveaway to the oil industry, or a giveaway to any other industry and its corporate titans. It may call for some sacrifice on our part, but a fraction of what our parents and grandparents gave to this country. It means that we pay more attention to our kids and their needs and less our own, that we once again show concern and compassion for our neighbor, and remember that we were once strangers in a strange land, that we show humility about our own achievements and recognize that none of us got here on our own, that all of us can prosper without someone else being made to suffer. You know, the way it used to be, the way it could be once again. Madam President, I yield back.
Madam President.
The senator from New Mexico.
President, I've heard several of my colleagues speak tonight about what this bill means for Americans all across America. Now, each of us has a responsibility to ask whether this bill meets the needs of the people that we're honored to serve. Now, I grew up on a small farm, as many of you know, working the land, caring for animals, sometimes even cleaning barns. And I can tell you, this bill does not pass the smell test. For New Mexicans, hardworking people, this bill does not help our families get ahead. New Mexicans work hard. Folks are not looking for a handout. New Mexicans are the type of people who would give you the shirt off their back if you needed it. It's just who we are, and I'm proud of it. But sometimes people fall in hard times. And I'll remind you all that this could happen to any of us. We might need medical care. We might need help putting food on the table. Maybe support to care for a loved one, or just want enough security to know that a job will be there for us. Some claim that this bill will help Americans, which we know is not the truth. Because from where I stand, there is very little in this legislation that helps hardworking New Mexicans. Now, it's important that this debate is happening, because now New Mexicans and people all across America can clearly see what's in this bill and what's not. As has been said time and time again this evening, the vast majority of this legislation benefits the ultra-wealthy, the wealthiest 0.1%, getting over $250,000 back in their pocket. Can you believe this? How many people might not make that in a lifetime? An extra $250,000 in their pockets. That's what this bill's about. Now, meanwhile, it does not help farmers. It does not support teachers or children. Nothing for New Mexico seniors who rely on Medicaid and SNAP. And nothing for New Mexicans who served our country and deserve our care in return. New Mexicans are hardworking people who believe in the values of loving your neighbor, following what the Bible teaches us. Do unto others as you have them do unto you. This bill goes against everything New Mexicans stand for. It's not honest, it's not caring, and it's not fair. Now, I've heard my colleagues try to claim that this bill does not cut assistance. That's a lie. It's not true. This bill cuts more than $1 trillion from the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program and Medicaid, for crying out loud. Senate Republicans are gutting the Affordable Care Act and ripping health care away from over 17 million Americans. Now, a few of my colleagues across the aisle have spoken with some clarity, saying out loud what we all know to be true. One Republican senator warned about SNAP, about these cuts, saying, quote, if we don't watch out, people are going to get hurt. Another Republican colleague said of Medicaid, quote, we can't be cutting health care for working people and for poor people in order to constantly give special tax treatment to corporations. Now, that same senator went on to say that, quote, slashing health insurance for the working poor is morally wrong. That's right. I wish more of them spoke with that clarity. At least a few of them are saying out loud what the rest of America is thinking. Now is the time for more courage, though. The courage to put people first. My colleagues all have a chance to vote against this legislation. They all have a chance to vote for amendments that will say, hands off Medicaid. Don't cut those nutrition programs that one senator said are going to hurt people if we don't watch out. This bill takes food from the mouths of New Mexican children and takes care away from New Mexicans who are sick. And it's not just New Mexico. These cuts will hurt people in every state. My Republican colleagues, to lock up one more vote, offered something called the polar payoff, a carve-out for one state. Now look, these carve-outs are an admission that this bill will leave people hungry and without care. Plain and simple. Otherwise, why would they want to carve out for their state? Why was this carve-out added? Because this scam of a bill cuts funding for rural hospitals and the programs that feed children and families in need. For our rural communities out there, for the farmers and ranchers who grow our food, this bill will hurt your bottom line while closing rural hospitals, closing rural grocery stores. For families who rely on SNAP, this bill means less food on the table and more children going to bed hungry, all while making health care, especially emergency care, harder to access. That is what this bill does to hardworking Americans. And I'm not even mentioning the Americans who currently have health care but will no longer be able to afford it because of this bill. Those of you watching at home tonight who do not think this impacts you, it just might. Earlier this week, I had the honor of speaking with a healthcare worker from Las Cruces, Julie. Julie traveled all the way from New Mexico to Washington, D.C. to tell Congress not to mess with her family's Medicaid. Like many of her colleagues, she had a story to share. Now, Julie's son received mental health care through Medicaid. When that coverage was cut, Julie lost her son. Soon after, her daughter was diagnosed with a serious condition that required immediate care. Now, without Medicaid, her daughter may not have survived either. Just think about that. Let it sit in. New Mexicans understand the responsibility of looking after family. Like so many families in New Mexico and across the country, I grew up helping to take care of my grandparents, Grandma Nestora and Grandpa Celedon, my dad's parents. Now, when my other grandparents, Grandpa Luis and Grandma Cleotilde, were victims of a terrible car accident, I watched my mom, my uncles, my aunts, and my cousins show what grace looks like, what love feels like, what compassion really means. Now, this bill is a direct attack on those values. Values of helping one another and shared sacrifice. There's no shared sacrifice in this bill, only more handouts for the wealthy. There is nothing in this bill that shows that we are all looking out for our neighbors across America. And like so many Americans, I'm so deeply concerned about the price tag. This bill would add more than $3 trillion to the national debt. Now, to people watching, this is not just a number. It affects your everyday life. Higher interest rates. Think about your credit cards, your car loans, your mortgages if you're fortunate to have one. This bill is going to make your life more expensive. It's a total betrayal of our constituents. So to the American people, hear me when I say keep speaking. You've done it before. The American people, all of you that spoke up, you helped stop the sale of our public lands. You made your voices impossible to ignore. Now, this bill is not the law of the land yet. But if we stay silent, It will be. So keep organizing, keep calling, and keep showing up. Because part of our responsibility as American citizens is to protect one another, to stand by one another, to treat others the way that we want to be treated. The golden rule. It's not hard. We all have a responsibility to stand up when something this dangerous threatens our neighbors, our values, and our future. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from New Jersey.
Mr. President, I rise today to lift up the fact that this reconciliation bill will do real harm to countless American families. It's not theoretical or hypothetical. Families are hurting right now. The opiate crisis that has ravaged large parts of my state, mental health crisis that people across this country are so concerned about and are begging for help about. And so many other challenges that are out there. Every single family knows the fear of a health crisis. Like Susan, a mother I met at a town hall down in Egg Harbor. A town hall that was part of a series of town halls that I did, trying to highlight the challenges that so many families are facing. And in this crowded room of over hundreds of people, a woman named Susan shared her story. A mom of a 24-year-old son with Down syndrome. They used Medicaid to be able to cover his care. She broke down at the weight of her fear and worry of her child, something a lot of us can relate to. She said to me that this is the face of Medicaid. And as I went over to give her a hug, I remember what she said. It's real. And it is real. And I know everyone in here knows that. I know because offices on both sides of the aisle are getting the same calls. Our phone systems broke down because of the overwhelming volume of people calling and literally begging us not to do this. Begging us to protect Medicaid so their kids can see the doctors. Begging us not to cut SNAP benefits so their students can have access to healthy food. It is a humbling experience seeing a parent begging for the resources to take care of their sick child. And yet, as I look around, I see far too many people rushing through this process to get it done, with little care about the resulting impact it will have, generational damage that will be done while we are rushing through, barreling through, without the ability to properly debate this. Well, I want you to know, the people in New Jersey, the people in this country, this budget represents an abandonment by their government. And this will hurt everyone we are supposed to be helping. Some of the people that could be impacted the most are people within the disability community. Hundreds of thousands of people in New Jersey with disabilities rely on Medicaid for coverage. Over 15 million across our country, including a man named Tom Spadaro, a disability advocate in Ocean County, New Jersey, who joined me for a town hall. After a gun accident when he was 11, Tom is a total quadriplegic, dependent on a ventilator and others. Medicaid helped him go to school, then college, and in his own words, has given him dignity. When talking about this bill that we are debating here today, he said, quote, "If I lose Medicaid, I feel like I'm getting shot in the head again. This time, it's not a bullet, it's legislation." I want his words to echo through this chamber today for everyone to hear. If this budget passes, families in every single state across this country will feel these cuts long after the media and the Trump administration have decided it's time to move on and get over it. A cancer patient doesn't just move on, when they have to delay treatment because they've lost insurance coverage, when a family has to upend their lives to become caregivers to their parents because they can't afford elder care, when a hospital closes and the new closest emergency room is hours away after the child is in an accident and needs help now, not in 5 hours, they won't get over it. America will feel this long after Donald Trump is no longer in the White House, and they will remember what has happened to their lives because of it. Now, there's some people listening who might not think that this is going to affect them. But these cuts to health care in this bill are so dramatic that it's going to have an impact that reverberates all throughout our communities. I talked to a hospital leader in New Jersey who said that these cuts could be so devastating for their revenue because of how much they get through Medicaid reimbursements that they're not sure that they're going to be able to keep their doors open. A hospital, not certain that they can keep their doors open. This is not the only story like this across my state, across the country. Whether it's rural hospitals or suburban or urban, we're going to have a lot of challenges that are going to reverberate beyond just those on Medicaid. It's going to affect every single one of us and raise prices at the same time. Losing that critical care in communities not only abandons people in their time of most need, but it leaves a tragic ripple effect on others and other hospitals. So today I'm putting forward an amendment to this bill that would stop this from happening and directly take out the parts of this bill that would force hospital closures and reduce access to affordable health care for so many across this country. In no reality should we be helping billionaires send their rockets to outer space while turning people away at hospitals. And yet this is the reality we find ourselves in, deciding how much care is acceptable to take away from families across New Jersey to fit a budget line, or how many patients can be turned away from life-saving medication just so that the wealthy can have a nice tax break. A doctor in Frenchtown shared some profound words with my office. She said, Medicaid is a reflection of our values. It's how we show up for each other when life gets hard. Well, what does it say about our nation as we were having this debate that could very well take $1 trillion out of Medicaid? About those who need the care the most, as if they're just expendable, as if they are just some remainder on the equation of capitalism that is just pushed to the wayside, as just an inevitability, as a shrug of the shoulder of our society and say, I'm sorry for what happened to you, without a care and an extended arm and a hand to reach out and pull them up. Let's be very clear. This bill will cause prices to drive up. In New Jersey alone, over 454,000 families will see higher costs in premiums, according to the New Jersey Department of Banking and Insurance, which is why I'm introducing an amendment to make sure this bill wouldn't raise these costs by striking provisions that would increase premiums or out-of-pocket costs under Medicaid, the Children's Health Insurance Program, and some private insurance marketplaces too. We cannot allow billionaires to get richer while working families are seeing drastic increases to their premiums or out-of-pocket costs. Costs to keep their children healthy as we deal with the worst measles epidemic in decades. Costs to afford their kids medicine while we see our government attacking science and fact, making parents have to work that much harder to keep their children safe. With all the challenges we are dealing with right now, it's painful to think through what will happen if this bill goes into effect. And the fact that these healthcare cuts will increase our gaps, worsen conditions for our vulnerable communities, including children. If we can't stand up for them, for our children, who are we willing to stand up for? And as I said at the beginning, every family has a healthcare story. Everyone has felt overwhelmed in the face of sickness and injury. Just a year ago, my father took a fall. I got the call while I was on the campaign trail, rushed down to the hospital. But even after the surgery, what we learned is there was an even more debilitating challenge that we face, a cognitive decline as my father is descending into dementia. I just spent Father's Day weekend with my father, the entire weekend. But it was in the emergency room as he had twice fallen in 2 days, 2 separate trips to the emergency room. My family is overwhelmed right now. We struggle to think through his needs that go far beyond what we can be able to provide, goes far beyond what Medicare can provide. And it's not just my father and my family. We have failed seniors. We have failed as we have failed to plan and create a place for elder care in this country that preserves a foundation of dignity and decency for everybody. And when you are in the trenches fighting for your own life or gripping the hand of a loved one struggling, the last thing you want to think about is worrying if you're eligible for this treatment or that. You want to be able to provide what it takes for your loved one to survive, to be able to go a little further, spend a little more time on this planet with us, and to grow our love deeper. And we think about that, and then we ask ourselves, well, why is this bill happening? Why are these cuts happening? It's not to bring down the deficit. Instead, it's going to balloon the deficit by trillions of dollars. Who among us in this country think that the problems that we face as a nation is because the wealthiest among us don't have enough? The distrust in government right now, it's not because politics isn't doing enough to help the most well-off in our country, the billionaires and the millionaires. I ask my colleagues to find the courage to do the right thing. I want us to bring back to 2017, in this very chamber, as senators gathered to decide the fate of the Affordable Care Act, which was at the time hanging by a thread. Many of my colleagues here in this chamber were also on the floor at that time. I was not. I was a regular citizen, angry at what I was seeing unfolding, watching it on my phone. A citizen that felt so detached from what was happening on this chamber. I remember thinking to myself, how could the Senate be seriously considering doing such harm to this country, to so many Americans, by trying to gut pre-existing condition protections, the Affordable Care Act, so much others? I asked myself, am I missing something? Am I missing information to understand why it is that this is even happening? And we saw rushed conversations, and we saw people running back and forth. And we also saw Senator John McCain step up and signal with his arm that he did not stand for this. Senator McCain's vote was a rare moment of doing what you know is right, even when you're surrounded by noise telling you it's wrong. It's surreal now finding myself on the floor of the Senate in a similar moment in our own nation's history, when so much on the line with this vote, and I look around this chamber and yet again think the exact same questions from 8 years ago. How can the Senate seriously be considering gutting care for so many? And now, with the benefit of being here and the conversations and the information, I'm still left with this question of, am I missing something? How is it that such an esteemed body that is meant to protect the American people, in this chamber where so many decisions have been made to protect the American people, that we are on the cusp of doing something that will do generational damage to so many American families? This vote before us seems as surreal and reckless from within this chamber as it does from outside. But while the problem is the same, so is the solution. It is about courage. The courage John McCain had. The courage that so many of my constituents have. So many people who have called and shared their personal stories, stories about their family's health they probably have never told anybody. But they feel so desperate right now to do something that they are willing to open themselves up. Be able to pull back the curtain of the dangers and the pain that they have endured, to be able to try to do anything to stop this bill from hurting Americans. That is courage. And it's courage about standing up against the big money and the special interest, and sometimes it feels insurmountable. And I say to my colleagues here today that you won't be remembered by whether or not you pass this bill on President Trump's timeline, or you feign concern about constituents just to be able to stab them in the back later. You'll be remembered by your courage to stand up and say no. You'll be remembered by your courage to speak out for the people, not just the few who have paid, but for all of us. You'll be remembered in the same way as our former colleague was remembered by what he did 8 years ago. I urge you to remember that this job is bigger than all of us, bigger than any one man, any one party. It is about using our vote and our courage to make lives better for those that we represent. History and the American people are watching. You still have time. You still have power. I still believe in this chamber and believe it can be a force for good. Let us use it for the children, for the disabled, for those not in this room. And with that, I yield back.
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from California.
Mr. President, I too rise in opposition to the reconciliation bill before us. But before I get to my objections over the substance of this historic attack on working and middle-class families, I want to speak for a minute as the ranking member of the Rules Committee. And I need to address how Republicans are abusing the process to get here. They're breaking the Senate rules to hide the true costs of the bill. For the second time in just 6 weeks, the Republican majority is going nuclear on the Senate rules. And they're doing it with the same purpose, to avoid the 60-vote threshold of the filibuster in order to pass a very unpopular agenda. Now, I know oftentimes we're advised against getting into quote-unquote process, because most people may not care about process or understand process, but in this particular case, it serves to underscore the significance of the damage that this bill represents, the procedural lengths to which the Republican majority is going to try to get this done. And I do have to say it's a little surprising because it was just in May that Senate Leader Thune unequivocally said, quote, "While Republicans are in charge, the legislative filibuster will remain in place," end quote. If we go back to January, he was asked about this because folks kind of had a sense that this might be coming. He said then about overruling the Senate parliamentarian, quote, "That's totally akin to killing the filibuster. We can't go there. People need to understand that," end quote. But now Republicans are trying to do exactly that, to hide behind the technical language of Senate procedure to harm working families. And no, like I said, it's not the first time. Just last month, Republicans voted to override the very plain language of the Congressional Review Act. And they voted to overrule the parliamentarian to repeal California's Clean Air Act standards with a simple majority vote. Fast forward to today, they're running the same play, this time with trillion-dollar consequences, not just air quality and public health consequences. See, colleagues and folks watching at home, budget reconciliation is the most powerful expedited procedure statute on the books. You can do a lot with a simple majority and avoid the filibuster, but you have to do it by the rules of reconciliation. But today, the Republican majority wants to extend trillions of dollars of tax cuts for President Trump's billionaire friends and extend those tax cuts permanently. That's not just terrible, terrible policy, it's against the Senate rules. The Congressional Budget Act says clearly that reconciliation bills cannot increase the debt beyond 10 years. Now, it doesn't take a Nobel Prize-winning economist to know that a permanent trillion-dollar tax cut would do exactly that. And so once again, following the same playbook they did last month, the majority is going to twist the rules to try to find a way. They're again ignoring the guidance from the parliamentarian's office that doesn't fit their agenda. And they're setting yet another new precedent for this body. Not only continue to overrule the parliamentarian, but to ignore adding trillions of dollars of costs under the, quote, current policy baseline. As we did during the Clean Air Act debate last month, I and my Democratic colleagues will once again remind our Republican colleagues that sooner or later Democrats will be back in the majority. By then, the American people will have felt the pain of this bill, but we'll make sure that they understand just how hard you tried to work to hide it from them. Democrats will not let the American people forget what Senate Republicans do this week. Now on to the substance of budget reconciliation. Mr. President, how many times have we heard the Trump administration these past few months say that they're focused on fraud, waste, abuse? Now, these are the buzzwords that they turn to when they're trying to bat away questions or when Americans are trying to get clarity on whether the life-saving services that they depend on are about to get cut. But in reality, what we're seeing happen this week is one of the biggest acts of fraud in American history playing out right before our very eyes. With the bill under debate today, and it is past midnight, so we're into Tuesday, so I can still say today, Donald Trump and his billionaire allies are literally stealing from working families in order to reduce the amount of taxes that they would have to pay. Literally robbing from the poor to give to the rich. And for anyone really wondering whether they would actually do that, we know that they will, because they've done it before. In 2017, during the first Trump presidency, Republicans seemed fine, saying they could afford hundreds of billions of dollars in permanent tax cuts for large corporations. I remember the arguments back then. This is going to grow the economy, they said. In time, it will reduce the debt, they said. That didn't happen. So today, now they're arguing that we can't afford programs that keep kids from going hungry. We can't afford the programs that keep lights on in emergency rooms. It's outrageous. In 2025, so many working families are struggling to keep up with the rising costs from Trump's chaotic tariff wars, with prices going up for groceries and other everyday goods. Many are working long hours and still struggling to make ends meet or to afford care for their loved ones. I get it. I've been there. Colleagues, as I've shared with you before, I'm the proud son of working-class parents who came to the United States from Mexico in the 1960s. I'll remind you that for 40 years, my father worked as a short-order cook, and my mom cleaned houses. On those modest salaries, they raised my sister, my brother, and I in the proud working-class community of Pacoima, California. And I remember what it was like to live paycheck to paycheck. I know how unnerving it could be, for example, when the car broke down and you listened and witnessed your parents debate because, on the one hand, maybe they couldn't afford the cost of repairing the car right away. But they also realized that they couldn't afford to not fix the car because they had to get to work. And I know that there's so many Americans in communities like the one I grew up in that aren't looking for handouts. That's not what we're arguing or debating in this bill. Americans just want a fair chance to work hard and provide for their family. There's pride and dignity in working hard and providing for families. That's part of the American dream. People just want a fair playing field. In a country with as much promise and profit as the United States of America, that shouldn't be too much to ask for. But not only would the Republican budget reconciliation bill be one big handout for the wealthiest Americans, it would actually make life harder for working families in order to pay for it. That's wrong, and it's cruel. At its very core, just like Trump did in 2017 with the help of Republicans in Congress, this bill is fundamentally about one thing and one thing only: cutting taxes for the wealthiest Americans and big corporations. How else do you explain the fact that the top 0.1% will see a tax cut of more than $250,000 a year, while millions of American households will actually see a reduction in their annual income or take-home pay? That's because to pay for the massive handouts to the wealthy, Republicans are gutting health care and cutting services that so many working families depend on. And they're twisting themselves into knots in order to cut around $1 trillion in health care. Cuts that would leave 16 million Americans without health insurance. We're talking about seniors. We're talking about children, Americans with disabilities, hardworking families who don't deserve to be kicked off their health insurance just so billionaires can pay less in taxes. These devastating cuts, by the way, will also close rural hospitals around the country, including in California, where so many are already struggling just to keep the doors open. And for folks listening to the debate thinking that, well, if I'm not on Medicaid, then this may not apply to me, this isn't going to hurt me, let me remind you that if your local hospital that relies on Medicaid dollars is forced to cut services or cut staff or even close its doors as a result, then yes, you too will be hurt. But the bill doesn't stop there. In this bill, Republicans cut SNAP, nutrition assistance, that critical lifeline that so many count on to literally feed their families. How much more cruel can you get? But wait, there's more. Republicans are also rolling back the historic progress we've made investing in our transition to a clean energy economy, targeting the millions of clean energy jobs that are fueling innovation and helping us stay ahead of China. The cuts to clean energy that Republicans are making in this bill will lead to higher energy costs, higher electricity bills for so many families. I'm reminded that this last November, so many voters went to the polls and voted hoping for lower prices. They were desperate and looking for relief, and that's what motivated their votes. But this bill does the opposite. So I have to wonder, for my Republican colleagues who are supporting this measure, who is it that you're fighting for? Did any of you really come to Congress to take food away from the hungry? To take care away from sick children? What are you proposing be done here? Now, I've seen Republicans go back and forth on this bill for months now, I'm sure trying to decide just how much they can try to get away with. And I've heard some of the arguments that they plan to make to justify voting for this bill. Some of them will argue that we need this bill because we need to reduce the deficit. Talk about misleading. This bill adds trillions, yes, trillions of dollars to our nation's debt. So even when they try to twist the numbers and come up with the funny math, it doesn't even result in deficit reduction. And you know how you can tell? Because the Republicans included a $5 trillion increase to the debt limit in this bill. If the bill and the cuts included in the bill indeed reduce the deficit, as they claim it does, they wouldn't have needed to raise the debt limit in the process. So let's be clear. Republicans who are voting for this bill know full well it will hurt so many of their constituents. That's why behind closed doors you have Republicans handing out flyers that show just how devastating Medicaid cuts will be in states represented by Republicans. Or we hear they're discussing the burden that SNAP cuts will have on state and local governments. But because the leader of their party wants to sign this bill to celebrate the 4th of July this year, many of them will vote yes. But I'll ask again, who is this bill in service of? Who are you standing up for? Who are you fighting for? I'll tell you who I'm fighting for. I'm fighting for people like Jesus da Costa from San Diego, a home care provider who in 2016, because of his mother's full-time, who became his mother's full-time care provider when she was tragically hit by a car and became disabled. Jesus can't hold a full-time job and carry all the responsibilities of looking after his mother. So for both Jesus and his mother, Medicaid has been a lifeline. I'm fighting for him. I'm fighting for people like Tina Ewing Wilson in the Inland Empire, who remembers what it was like the last time her Medicaid benefits were cut. Tina struggles with seizures and developmental disabilities and requires care 24/7. But when the Great Recession hit and Medicaid cuts followed, Tina knew she could only afford her care by offering free room and board to caregivers. Caregivers who went out to abuse drugs and alcohol and took advantage of her financially. Tina's terrified of that possibly happening again if these Republican cuts to Medicaid impact her. I'm fighting for her. And I'm fighting for the families I met at Rady Children's Hospital, where over half of all patients are covered by Medicaid. And I'm fighting for the nurses and the caregivers who fear for their patients. They care for their patients, but they're fearing for their patients because of these proposals. For every parent across the country who's working their tail off to put food on the table for their children, but every now and then may need a helping hand. If you see these Americans, if you have constituents with similar experiences in your state, and still think that they should have less of our help, not more, then I guess we came to Congress for different reasons. If you've seen so many corporations' profits soaring and the wealth inequality in our country growing, and think that billionaires need more tax relief, then I guess we came to Congress for different reasons. And if this week you'll vote to rip these critical lifelines away from millions of Americans because you somehow think it's the right political calculation, then surely we came to Congress for different reasons. Colleagues, it's crystal clear. I urge you to vote no on this bill and stand with me, stand with us, stand up for working families. That's what I plan to do. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the Senate stands adjourned until 9 a.m.